Good morning, everyone, and afternoon, depending on where everyone is from across the country. We're just about to begin. I think everyone's just joining now. And as you do join, please know that we are using simultaneous translation for today's workshop. So just to select French audio, use the globe live translation icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. And I'll repeat that in a second as people come on as well. All right, I think I'm going to start us off. So my name is Krista Costas Bradstreet. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Policy for the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, or CPRA. I also want to acknowledge my colleague, MJ Akonde. MJ is CPRA's Director of Operations, and she assists with all of our technical background work for the webinars, for which we can't thank her enough. As the National Office of CPRA is located in Ottawa, I would like to acknowledge that CPRA is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Mohawk First Nations. We acknowledge the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and of the original peoples in what we now know as Canada. And we aim to contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. For those of us who are settlers, through our work at CPRA, we commit to recognizing and honoring the relationships between Indigenous people, their life ways, and their land. Today's workshop is actually the final of a series of Reimagine Rec workshops. Today we're talking about technology, the new frontier in recreation and community sport. But before we get going, I just want to give you a very, very brief background on CPRA. So we are a national organization dedicated to realizing the full potential of parks and recreation as a major contributor to community health and vibrancy. Over our 60-year history, CPRA has been the national voice for parks and recreation, advancing the collective interests of our members through leadership and advocacy, policy, and research. We're a national network dedicated to the well-being of people, communities, and the natural and built environments. And we serve as a resource for our members and partners by contributing knowledge and opportunities that enhance and grow the sector. CPRA is an alliance of 13 provincial and territorial parks and recreation associations across Canada. And collectively, we envision a Canada in which everyone is engaged in meaningful, accessible parks and recreation experiences that foster individual well-being, community well-being, and the well-being of our natural and built environments. We work with a variety of national and international organizations to further the parks and recreation agenda in Canada. So as I mentioned, today I did talk about the fact that we are using simultaneous translation. So if you are joining us and speak French, you have access to simultaneous translation by clicking on the Globe Live translation icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we've also enabled the transcription function as well. And MJ, next slide, please. So today's workshop will feature 3 presentations followed by an opportunity for questions and answers with the speakers. So you're welcome to add your questions into the chat box or preferably into the Q&A box at any point, but we probably will get to them towards the end of the workshop. And you'll also have an opportunity to complete some feedback. So we'll be sending you a survey, and if you could take just, it's less than 5 minutes to fill out and get it back to us, that'd be fantastic. And then you'll also have an opportunity to access this recording and the slides. As soon as I'm done, I'll put the slides in the chat box in both English and French. So you will have those, but you can access the recording as well. And you can find that on the bench. And if you're not familiar with the bench, it is CPRA's online community. It's a place for the sector to meet, work, and grow together. We launched it in July of 2020, and it has over 2,000 users now and growing every day. So on the bench, you'll find resources, events, portals that are dedicated to the framework for recreation, as well as Parks for All. You'll find professional development opportunities, and in the coming months, the new benefits hub. We also have a number of discussion groups, and we have started a discussion group on the bench around Reimagine Rec. So we invite you, if you haven't already joined, to join, and encourage you to start some discussions, ask some questions about information that you'd like. And together we can continue to build the bench and our online community. So I'd like to now just invite Mike Roma and Bill Greenlaw to join us. Mike is the chair of the CPRA board, and he'll just begin by saying a few words. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Krista. Hello, bonjour. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the CPRA board and our association, thanks for participating today. Technology is a big deal for our sector, for sure. I know personally, if I didn't have TeamSnap telling me where to take my kids or myself to our next sporting event, I'd be lost. I also know that I don't feel like I've had exercise unless my fitness tracker actually keeps track of it for me. So I think the technology impacts were starting to be felt before the pandemic, and obviously the pandemic's just accentuated that and given us a different way to look at parks and recreation. So excited to hear more about that from our presenters today. At CPRA, we're very proud of the Reimagine Rec work that we've done. Our team of consultants and administration and everybody across the country who participated in the process. It's been a big deal, and it's provided a lot of good insight for our sector. We couldn't have done it without the help of Sport Canada. So I just want to thank Sport Canada again for their support in having us undertake the Reimagine Rec process. And I also want to thank the Federal, Provincial, and Territorial Physical Activity and Recreation Committee for their partnership and their support to help deliver these workshops, not webinars. We're calling them workshops now. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bill Greenlaw. So he is the Executive Director for Community Sport and Recreation, which is a division of the Government of Nova Scotia's Department of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. He's also the co-chair of the Federal, Provincial, Territorial Physical Activity and Recreation Committee. So over to you, Bill.
Yeah, so good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are living. As you are aware, I'm the co-chair of PARC, or the long version is Physical Activity, Sport and Recreation Committee. And I'm extremely excited and pleased to welcome you here to the third workshop, focusing on technology in recreation and community sport. PARC has had the opportunity to support CPRA on the three workshops in this series for sport, recreation, physical activity, including what we have today. I think if you've been on before, or if you're new, just a reminder, this is part of a broader knowledge transfer initiative that we've set up and at our PARC committee, the FPT table. And that it has two complementary components, one on focusing on the renewal and recovery of physical activity and community sport in Canada. The other component is geared towards FPT government officials. So similar type workshops are happening with my colleagues across governments as well. So very pleased to be providing support to those two initiatives. It's our hope that you'll find today's workshop useful. Hopefully you'll find the information informative, and about how to use opportunities for using technology within the sport and recreation sector. I'd like to thank CPRA for hosting today's workshop and wish all of you a productive and successful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Mike, for your remarks. And with the next slide, I'll just give you a quick overview of what we're going to chat about today. So again, we have three speakers. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about adaptive leadership. Then we're going to go on and really get into to the focus of today's workshop around technology, both for training and leadership, and look at the Northern experience, and then also some resources and sources in terms of trends in technology. So very high level, and then some common themes and takeaways for you today. So to kick us off, I want to introduce you to John Frittenberg. John is the principal of the JF Group, which is a nationally recognized management consultancy specializing in the sport, recreation, and physical activity sector. Throughout his 35-year career, John has assisted municipal, commercial, and not-for-profit clients stay abreast of key trends while developing strategies for success. The JF Group's client list includes federal, provincial, and municipal governments, as well as national, provincial, and municipal sport and recreation organizations that operate facilities and deliver sport and recreation-related services. So over to you, John. Thanks.
Thank you, Krista, and welcome. I'm looking at the attendance list, and we've got close to 100 participants, so that's great. And I see some familiar names, so thank you very much for attending. I'm very pleased with the Reimagine Rec project and the initiative, or at least the results that the initiative has generated. I should mention that it was overseen by a management team led by myself, but also included Joe Dorian, who you'll meet today, Diane English from CPRA, Larry Ketchison, former CEO of Parks and Recreation Ontario, Brian Johnson, an independent consultant from Vancouver, and Pierre Morin, now also an independent consultant out of Quebec. We had 4 research elements included in Reimagine. Each were intended to deliver knowledge and information that the Parks and Recreation sector could utilize in terms of dealing with the closures that we had back starting in 2020. And then as we sort of jerked in and out of restrictions, depending on where you were within the country. We had literature review, we analyzed existing surveys, we conducted focus groups, and we also collected best practices. And all of that information is contained in separate reports as well as a summary report. I strongly advise you to get onto the bench and look at it. It's just chock full of very useful information, and hopefully it's written in a way that it can be practically applied in your own situation. As Krista and I think Mike also mentioned, all of the sessions that we have conducted were and are also located on the bench. So if you did miss any of the previous workshops, they're listed on the bench and available for your viewing. In terms of challenges and changes that are affecting the sector, we've learned a lot since 2020. That's when we started collecting the information. Of course, then places were shut down, and we were. Some of you may have experienced different roles and functions that you were challenged to deliver. Many community centers, for example, were turned into food distribution sites or temporary testing sites. And so some of maybe yourself or some of your staff had new responsibilities that they needed to adapt to. I am very pleased to report that when talking to people from other sectors that were calling upon the recreation sector for assistance, they were amazed at the versatility and adaptability inherent with the staff that work generally in recreation. So that's a real testament to the adaptability that's already built into the type of staff that we already employ. We do know, however, these changes have really, well, they're unprecedented, and they have really stressed the sector for a whole variety of reasons. The sector and the staff working within it are stressed, similar to people working in healthcare and so on, and others that are working on the front line. This has led to, or at least exacerbated, existing labor issues that pre-existed the pandemic, but were exposed by it. And hence, we do have people who are leaving the sector complaining about burnout, too many responsibilities, uncertainties with respect to longevity of their positions within the sector. So we do have and will probably continue to have staffing and labor issues magnified and exacerbated by the pandemic. We do know that right now across the country, we have varying degrees of restrictions. Depending on where you are, you may still have restrictions with respect to access to recreation and sport facilities. Some are open, some are closed. And so that really, again, speaks to the need for adaptability and for planning in order to be able to meet the challenges that this provides. The other thing that has been interesting and somewhat unfortunate is the unintended consequences of certain things that were either brought in by the sector or imposed on the sector. And I'm speaking now specifically of things like vaccine passports. We heard reports of people, frontline staff, who were charged with the responsibility of ensuring people were vaccinated to come into a recreation facility or an arena, and really being put in uncomfortable situations. And of course, in many cases, these are frontline people that are junior on the staff ladder, and really that was unfortunate and actually difficult to see. sector has historically been adaptable. So our challenge is to use that creativity and adaptability to start to manage the crisis. So in terms of steps and ideas and thoughts about managing the crisis, it is important for you to embrace the fact that this is going to be turbulent times. While we are moving into a new phase, it is going to remain to be turbulent. One thing that will not change, and that is the target audience or the recipient of our programs and services are people, and the services are delivered by people. So in fact, we are in the people business, and that's not going to change. But we do know that people do need and provided information in order to be able to actively respond to what they need to do to manage their own lives and to take advantage of the services that you're going to provide to them once you're able to do so. There was a very interesting study not too long ago published in Fit Business operators that messaging that resonated clearly with their clientele, and the return rate of those individuals once their facilities were able to open. And it was very interesting that the organizations that had clearly communicated good information to their clientele, information that supported them, that possibly gave them alternatives to physical activity that they were denied by not being able to access the facility, different routes and apps and things that they could take advantage of, those facilities got a much higher return rate than facilities that were either mute or they didn't communicate or they provided meaningless messages. So we do know that communication does have a positive impact upon your people and will be element to having them come back. Are able to come back, there are likely to be some restrictions, continuing to be restrictions on your ability to I believe we're going to be dealing with a new normal, but that will remain to be seen. But there will be some practices that will be required in order to either meet public health restrictions or to meet the expectations of your clientele. Recent study out of the States indicates that down there, at least, they're looking at 65% return ratio with a 35% expectation of the delivery of similar services through other means. And so in this particular case, it may be that people are interested in coming back to a facility about 6 in 10 times or 7 in 10 times and access the facilities or the services remotely, virtually. So there will be that will be very likely a new element that will be brought into the delivery process. Also, we're very likely going to see a higher demand for activity outside, and we're already seeing organizations that are adapting to that. And finally, in terms of managing the crisis, it is teamwork, and you do need to communicate both with your clientele as well as your staff in order to be able to get the best, or provide the best services and supports for both of those groups. Ready for recovery then. The consequences of the pandemic are going to be, changes will be driven by a combination of on us by public health officers or other agencies, but also people's expectations and their preferences. So we're going to have to very attuned to both of those in order to be able to be successful in meeting the needs of our clientele, both our former clientele as well as potential new ones. For example, we do know that there likely will be, that will again be possibly regulated, but very, very, very likely dictated by the preferences of your clientele. You'll learn today about the increasing reliance on technologies, and that's going to be a lasting change. We also know that facility design is going to change and going to be refined. everything from facility design, wider hallways, more like you would find in hospitals, more automation. Again, you're going to hear about technology today. Sanitation and filtration built into HVAC systems. Without question, that's going to be it's here in new design. And common area design, such as change areas, they will also look differently. New program strategies, such as outdoors, I mentioned a little bit earlier. And you can't conclude all of these changes won't have an impact on budgets. They will, primarily on your cost budget because of staffing implications, and potentially on your revenue budget because of various delivery mechanisms that will be brought in the future. So I will wrap up by simply saying that we certainly don't have all the information that we need in order to successful future, but we certainly have a lot more than we had in 2000, and we're going to have more. So I would suggest that you put your plans together, you record what you are planning to do, record the results of what you have done, track it, and then adjust your plan, adjust your future strategies accordingly. I'm very excited to be able to participate in today's workshop, and I look forward to learning more about technology with the upcoming presentations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. And speaking of technology, we'll get yours updated as well. I think we lost you a couple of times, but we'll make sure we may come back to you with a couple of questions. So I would like to introduce you to Caroline Sparks from her home in the Yukon. Caroline works in the field of recreation, sport, and active living as a facilitator, planner, evaluator, curriculum designer, and educator. For 35 years, she has consulted across the North on initiatives such as the development of Nunavut, Ajut, Nunavut Sport Physical Activity and Recreation Framework, the Yukon Sport Action Plan, a Yukon First Nations Wellness Framework, and the Yukon Active Living Strategy, as well as facilitating Yukon Healthy Living Study and strategic planning for not-for-profit organizations. As the learning consultant for the Recreation North training program, Caroline has been instrumental in designing, piloting, and now delivering this remote training program to recreation leaders across the North. As a consultant and facilitator, Caroline understands the importance of working with individuals and communities to ensure outcomes that are relevant and meaningful, reflect local culture and values, and build community capacity and self-sufficiency for quality of life and well-being. Caroline holds an MA in Community Development and a BA in Leisure Studies from the University of Victoria, has completed career development and evaluation certificates, and is a master instructor trainer for the Canadian Red Cross. So thrilled to have you today, Caroline. Looking forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Krista, and thank you to CPRA for the invitation to present today. We've really appreciated the opportunities over the last 10 plus years to really put rural, remote, and the North on the landscape of recreation across the country, so thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and Tonquachin Council. For those of you who don't know where that is, that's in the area that you would refer to as Whitehorse, which is located in the southwest Yukon. And I think our temperature today is much more balmy than places in the east, so I'm quite happy to be here. As you probably know, before March 2020, we used technology on occasion for the delivery of our recreation programs, but I think overall in our sector, we really prefer to do things in person. But we had to change very quickly in March 2020. And as John mentioned, during the pandemic, technology allowed our sector to transform and adapt to what was a very rapidly changing context. So in preparing for this presentation, I actually Googled virtual recreation programs in Canada, and you wouldn't believe the millions of hits that I got with that. There's so many examples. I asked Krista when we talked about doing this webinar or workshop, if I could sort of focus on technology for training. But just as an aside, to give you a little side note and a little insight into the Yukon, the latest example that I've heard of that the Recreation Parks Association of Yukon's working on is a virtual pole dancing program in Dawson City, Yukon. The participants are in person, but they get to connect virtually to the pole dancing instructor somewhere else in the country. So truly, as we know, online, on-demand programming is here to stay. So moving to the next slide. As you know, the Reimagine Rec Highlights report recommends that we move forward and gather next practices with an eye to quality and equity. So in our time today, I'd like to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned about using technology specifically for training, for developing recreation leaders across the North, and for strengthening the capacity of our rural, remote, and northern communities to provide recreation programs and services. As Krista mentioned, I'm a Yukon-based consultant, but I've worked across all 3 territories for more than 30 years, and I continue to learn so much about the North. The work that I do is really grounded in a strong belief that quality recreation requires quality leadership. So recreation simply doesn't happen without people. So we need to invest in the people, and that's the purpose of today's presentation. I will focus primarily on my work through the Recreation North training program, but as a Red Cross Master Instructor Trainer, I've also been fortunate to have had the opportunity to develop and pilot other virtual coursework or courses over the past 2 years. So moving on to the next slide, I'd just like to introduce you a little bit to the North. So you might wonder, why do I have a capital N for the word North? So capital N North refers to the region that is north of the 60th parallel. And that's where all 3 territories cover approximately 40% of Canada's landmass. And the last I looked, we make up 0.01% of the population or something like that. The North is very remote geographically, but it's also very rich in the diversity of our cultures, languages, traditions, communities, recreation patterns, ecosystems, and weather. So all these characteristics combine to present us unique challenges when we're delivering community recreation, but they also lead to a impressive variety of recreation opportunities. Let's turn now to the word technology in the North. Although this is a word that we use a lot, I actually went and looked it up before preparing the presentation. So in my mind, technology is something that was invented or created, and it helps us to do things in new ways or to do things more efficiently than before. Think of how Mike introduced his watch and the different apps. Think online shopping, that's one of my favorites, online banking, and also online training. In the North, technology can be a blessing. So I can easily chat with Quentin in the picture there in Santa Kilowak, which is more than 3,000 kilometers away from me. But technology can also be a curse. For example, in one community, it took 16 minutes to download a 3 megabyte photo, or we've often, on multiple occasions, had the main fiber line that serves the Yukon and parts of the NWT cut. So no phones, no internet. And when you come to rely on it, that can be a tough pill to swallow for a day or two. So let's move on to my story then. On the next slide, the Recreation North training program is delivered through a partnership of the 3 territorial recreation and parks associations. This partnership started out because we really wanted to address what the Framework for Recreation in Canada clearly states as the need to develop and implement high quality training and competency-based capacity development programs for organizations and individuals working in recreation, particularly in under-resourced rural and remote areas. For those of you who are familiar with the framework, that's priority 5.4. And this priority helped us leverage support to move ahead with a training program. In 2015, we were successful at winning a $600,000 Arctic Inspiration Prize. You can see us with a big check in the photo there on the slide. The generosity of Arctic Inspiration Prize helped us to develop a Northern Recreation Leadership Training Program, to deliver it, and also to reduce barriers that many across the North experienced related to training. And this would not have been possible without technology as well as the support from Arctic Inspiration Prize. On the next slide, I've just introduced sort of the timeline, because we started working on this in 2011, before the framework for recreation in Canada and long before COVID. When the pandemic hit, everybody scrambled to move into online spaces. We were all on Zoom all the time and had Zoom fatigue. But fortunately, because we'd started our program before the pandemic, we were able to keep doing what we were already doing, because we had already introduced the use of technology for training. Being able to deliver training remotely both before and during the pandemic helped us recognize that when we use technology to deliver training in online contexts, it's very, very different to delivering training in person. Now, as we near the end of our fourth cycle or fourth year of delivering the training program, we're proud to offer 3 different certificates. And over the next year, we look forward to further developing a northern pathway for our graduates to CPRA's professional development certification. So if we move to the next slide, you might be wondering, what is the Recreation North training program if you're not familiar with it? As I mentioned, this training program was designed to build capacity for recreation across the North. John mentioned staffing and labor issues as a result of the pandemic. As a result of our remoteness, we were already experiencing some of those issues around burnout and turnover. So this training is very important for us in building capacity across the North. The training program targets recreation coordinators, program leaders, volunteers, board members, youth, and others who are interested in beginning or advancing their career in recreation. The training program is made up of a series of 19 different micro courses that we refer to as learning events. They're interactive and they're delivered remotely using basic technology through an online management system and the good old-fashioned telephone, so through conference calls. We make sure that the design uses simple technology, a computer with regular internet and a telephone. And this means that our participants can learn in place. In place can be at home, at work, out on the road, or even in the bush or on the land. Moving to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the North is diverse. Therefore, to ensure that the training we develop would be meaningful and relevant to diverse learners, communities, and cultures, we realized that we really needed some basic principles to ground or form foundations for our training program. So as this slide shows you, there's 3 things that sort of came to mind, and I tried to capture them simply here. So we addressed context, specifically the Northern context. We looked at content, so we looked at what was relevant for leading in recreation. And we wanted to ensure that the remote delivery wouldn't pose a barrier to anyone. So the computer ability, I know that's not the correct term, but we coined that. So anyways, moving on to the next slide, I just would like to explain each of these in a bit more detail. So there's many ways to describe the Northern context, but the 2 words that come to mind when I think about context, when we're thinking of training that uses technology, is people and place. So when you deliver training using technology, the design and delivery of it needs to really be informed by the diversity of the people who are directly involved in the training, or by the people who will benefit as a result of a person being trained. When we use technology to deliver training, it can be really hard to learn about our individual participants. It can be hard to figure out what their interests are, their learning styles, the priorities that their organization brings, the uniqueness of their community, and also the influence that culture has on their learning and on the delivery of recreation. Place also comes to mind when I think of context. So place involves geography, landscape, transportation. And because these all influence the way in which recreation takes place, we need to be very aware of that when we're looking at using technology to deliver training over 3 territories, which, you know, the distance from one side to the other is almost 5,000 kilometers, so a massive region. So that's a little bit about context. On the next slide, we'll look at content. So content needs to be meaningful, relevant, and applicable. What do I mean by that? Well, our training program is based on a model of 13 competencies for leading recreation in northern communities. The competency model informs the design of the training and ensures that our content is meaningful, relevant, and applicable. When we offer training from a distance using technology, it's likely that we're going to have diverse participants who bring different backgrounds and different experiences. So we try and make our training guide learning rather than direct the learning experience, because we're not experts in people's communities and in people's cultures. So we also incorporate activities that invite participants to apply what they learn. So we use technology to guide the training, but we invite them to connect with their communities to ensure that the content that they're learning and getting and the learning from it is meaningful and relevant and applicable. We also, because we guide this, we also can make sure that through the application of learning, participants understand the territorial and national priorities for sport, physical activity, and recreation. So when participants can form through technology, but also through intentional training, connections to each other and to their community, then they can also learn how their work connects to the territorial and national priorities in documents like the Framework for Recreation in Canada. And then what they're learning, or the content, becomes a lot more meaningful to them, relevant, and applicable not only to them, but also to our sector. So that way we're also building capacity for our sector. If we move to the next slide and the word computer ability, you can see that I've used the words accessibility and ability here. So the key is that we've learned that we have to use simple and not complicated technology. Simple technology is what helps us make training accessible, whether our participants are in Yellowknife or in Birdwash Landing. We make sure that our training doesn't rely on fancy programs or apps. And because of that, it means that people can participate even just using a cell phone, or even if they have slow DSL internet like I do. So if we don't get too adventurous and we stick with simple technology, more people actually participate because they don't require these superior digital literacy skills, and they don't need to know how to do all sorts of fancy things. So moving on, I'd like to introduce you now to some of the lessons that we've learned. So the first one shown on this slide here, lesson one, we've learned that technology increases participation in training. The image on this slide shows the extent of participation in our training program. And since we launched, we've had more than 250 individuals from 64 communities across the 3 territories participate. And there's absolutely no way we could have done this without technology. Using technology also means that our training is affordable. Not only are the registration fees a lot less, but there's no cost to travel, which is huge because in Nunavut alone, it's a minimum of $2,000 for an airfare. And there's also no loss of income when participants leave their home communities. So technology does make training more available. The design that we have breaks our training into small chunks that are offered regularly over 9 months. And therefore, if a small piece is missed that is required for a certificate, somebody can catch up on it later on. Remote learning also reduces the stress that comes with leaving home and work and family and community. And those are very intertwined across the North and in rural and remote communities. The second lesson we learned is on the next slide is somewhat contrary to the first lesson. So this lesson is that technology can actually decrease interest in training. I've heard a lot that we just want to do training in person. Well, I think the pandemic sort of taught us that that's not entirely possible. But imagine taking part in training that uses way too much technology. So it flips from Stormboard to Zoom to something else, or is too complicated to learn. How might you react? The same applies to instructors or facilitators who transitioning from in-person to online or blended environments can experience a lot of frustration and anxiety when they're trying to figure out how to actually do training online. So the increased possibilities that technology offers can sometimes be too overwhelming and difficult to learn for some. This leads us to lesson 3 on the next slide. In-person training is not the same as online training. Therefore, training that uses technology online needs to be designed differently to in-person training. And for those of you who've been involved in designing training, it actually takes way longer to do online training and to prepare it than it does for in-person. You really need to take time to rethink the design of the training. We were very fortunate because we developed our understanding of remote training and online facilitation through a great course offered by BC Campus called FLOW, and FLOW stands for Facilitating Learning Online. We also were able to bring in a facilitator to help us explore Indigenous ways of learning, and this was very important to rethink our design because of the diversity of Indigenous culture across the North. As a result, our training incorporates stories, and we really work on fostering community, even though the training takes place remotely. So the design of the training when you use technology is critical. Another lesson we learned, shown on the next slide, and I've just sort of captured a little bit of this, we could talk a long time on this one, is to choose technology and tools wisely. So we've talked about complicated technology versus simple things like a cell phone. There are also, we really need to consider bandwidth. So we did quite a bit of research into bandwidth before delivering our program. And we found that the learning management system we used worked most of the time. But as an example, in Iqaluit, it worked great at 10:30 in the morning or 10 o'clock at night. But between 5 and 7:30, when everybody came home from work, it just crashed and nothing would happen. And that's a result of bandwidth. People think sometimes might blame the tool or the software that you're using or the system, but actually understanding that bandwidth is a really important part of using technology to deliver training. The tools that we chose, like Zoom or Stormboard, so the tools that anybody chooses also affect the people who take part in the training. I find that it's very important to limit the number of tools because we do have participants who are cautious, might have concerns about privacy, might not have a lot of digital literacy skills. So it's really important to limit those tools because most of them now require that you have an account or you sign up or sign in. There can also be a cost related to using tools. So it's important to look at those and where they're hosted to. Canada versus the States, there's implications for that too. Another thing for our sector that's really important to consider is that technology puts us on our screens. So we increase our screen time. So when you deliver training using technology, it's really important to break up the training into smaller chunks, have physical activity breaks, and just deliver it differently than what we would if we were in person. Back channels are something else. The chat with Zoom is an example of a back channel, and those can help when you're using technology to sort of keep people engaged. So really, if you choose your technology and tools wisely, then you can engage your learners in ways that are meaningful for them. So I have one last lesson on the next slide. And as I mentioned, I seem to experience, at least across the North, before the pandemic, everyone wanted to do their training in person. Then during the pandemic, everyone started using technology for everything. So meetings, other activities, training. But moving beyond the pandemic, I really think that the best approach to training will be to use technologies in ways that help us develop connections and develop community. And that means that we need to integrate and not separate how we use technology. We need to combine high-tech things like the different tools we use with low or no tech tools in ways that engage more people. And I'll just share an example of what I mean. There's a couple listed on the slide here. But in our training program, people come online. We facilitate online that they do on their own. We also facilitate group conference calls that are like sharing circles. But then we also encourage them to go out into their communities and try something or do something or apply what they've learned, and then come back into the online environment and share their experiences. So that way we help people build their connections with each other and with their communities. One example that I really appreciated that's a Red Cross example is for some of the longer meetings, Red Cross has sent us care packages. So you get this care package in the mail beforehand, and during your break, you go and you make your little cake in a mug and have hot chocolate together. So you can also, send things in the mail so people can physically touch them while you're using technology for training. So let's go to almost the last slide here. Final thoughts on technology from me. I really believe that technology can help us deliver learning opportunities remotely. It's a huge benefit to networking and learning from each other. I feel like we have this big circle across the north of people that I've never met. I'm trying to learn their voices and their styles online. But those connections they've actually reduced burnout and staff turnover because people don't feel as isolated in their recreation leadership roles in small communities. Technology can vastly reduce the cost for training. It allows us ways to be creative, and it definitely affects how we communicate and facilitate. I really think that technology, we can use that to build capacity for our sector. Moving out of the pandemic or moving forward, regardless of what happens, we are facing a time where we're going to be stretched, especially for people coming into those frontline positions in recreation. And I think that we need to find ways to do small bite-sized bits of training and learning to connect them to who our sector is and to invite them to explore it and spend more time with us. And that's really how we're going to be able to build our capacity for our sector. So I'd like to end by saying on the next slide, this is one that we use across the north. Merci, Kwanashish, Masicho, Nakarmik. Thank you very much, Kwana. Thank you for joining me today. And if you'd like to connect with Recreation North, the last slide shows you some of the ways to do so. So thank you for the opportunity to present.
Awesome, Caroline. Thank you. That was great information, great lessons learned, and really nice to hear, as you mentioned at the beginning, what's happening in our north. We tend not to focus as much on the great work there, and really the work you've done up there is spectacular. And so I really appreciate you sharing all of that, all of the work that you are doing. And I encourage people to get in touch with Caroline to find out a little bit more. I just want to remind you too that if you do have some questions, you can put them into the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to those shortly. But I do want to introduce our next speaker, Joe Dwara. Joe's career spans 30 years working in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors with a specialty in physical activity promotion and population health. Since 2019, sorry, Joe's been an independent consultant providing services in strategic planning, project management, facilitation, community activation, stakeholder engagement, and multi-sectoral partnership brokering. Joe's also a member of the leadership team for the CPRA Reimagine Rec Initiative. So thanks, Joe, and I'll turn it over.
Awesome. Thank you, Krista, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Krista noted, I'm going to be speaking to high-level trends in the technology space for community recreation and sport. And so, leveraging technology to improve the recreation and sport experience for our clients and community residents is clearly not new. Carolyn spoke to this, John spoke to this. What is new, obviously, is that all providers like you in our sector have had to respond at breakneck speed to change, and we're still responding, which of course has been brought on by the pandemic. And where technology and innovation are concerned, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's a strategic opportunity, but it's also a fundamental challenge. And we'll speak about that as we go forward. So the next slide speaks to and introduces the concept of what's called the space race. It's in this context over the next 20 minutes or so that I'll share trends and resources and sources of information that I hope can help you as leaders make better and informed choices related to technology in these three areas of physical, digital, and earth. And I'll expand on each, of course. I first want to acknowledge that the concept of the space race is a title of a helpful thought leadership report from Siemens International. The link to this report is in the slide deck, and you can go there and look at it. And I've structured the sharing of the trends and resources around these three dimensions for two reasons. One is because all three of these dimensions, physical space, digital technology, and how our sector is clearly tied to environmental policy and action, are near or at the top of your priority list as administrators, policymakers, practitioners, and volunteers. The second reason is, taken together, I think that these three dimensions are really providing a clear and organized framework, albeit at the macro level, for how you might want to think about managing technology going forward within your organization or your community. So before we go further, I'll just want to acknowledge and declare that I have no affiliation nor conflict of interest as it concerns Siemens or any of the other institutions or reports that I'm going to be showing you here today. So let's talk about the physical space race on the next slide. First, I'd like to refer you to the recorded versions of two previous Reimagine Rec workshops. Both Mike and John have talked about these, but they relate to this topic today. So I'll just say that a safe return to recreation and community sport, which was convened in October of 2021, but also more recently, supportive places and spaces for recreation and community sport, which was hosted by CPRA on January 27th, contain a lot of great information that are either directly or indirectly related to this content. Both are available on CPRA's bench. You can go there and listen and watch. And so, as John noted earlier in his remarks, the pandemic sparked an urgent race to adapt. You are living that race right now. In this case, as it's noted in the Siemens report, it's about the changing needs and expectations of people in their buildings, in their factories, their facilities, homes, in their surrounding infrastructure, but also obviously in their pursuit for health-enhancing movement through recreation, community sport. And this trend towards healthy buildings, again, not new, has been catapulted to the front of the line in terms of a priority, in terms of looking at obviously the public health measures that are in play. And the context here is that your clients and your staff in recreation and community sport continue to expect you to do your part and to keep them safe from COVID-19 now, but really importantly, in terms of forward-looking planning, to keep them safe from future epidemics, endemics, and pandemics, as they are potentially expected to be on our horizon as we go forward. And, you know, to coin a phrase which is noted here, y'all come back now, that may ring hollow if the physical infrastructure where we invite clients to play and to recreate and to compete doesn't contribute to keeping them healthy, because they won't stay there when they do come back. Excuse me. So characteristics of healthy buildings include things like automated features and no-touch features. No doubt you have lots of these or increasingly more of these in your buildings that you are working in now. Energy efficiencies, as John had noted, water, lighting, air quality. And lastly, but certainly not least, in fact, top of the list, is air quality. So in its report of the 9 foundations of a healthy building, which was published by the Harvard School of Public Health, ventilation and air quality was at the top of the list of those 9. The top attribute that was required. And of course, you know this, but all sectors of society are moving to improve indoor air quality. The most obvious, perhaps, example as of late is that the requirement to change upgrade HVAC system and air quality systems in schools in many jurisdictions before the kids were brought back to classrooms in the fall. And there are other examples, though, of how technology in the physical space is trending and being used. And these are trends that some recreation organizations are beginning to connect to, and others need to think about. So the first is robotic tech. Robots are here, right? The future is now. And robotic technology is being used to, in different ways, detect and sanitize and clean and conduct deliveries in public spaces even. Perhaps you've heard of the new term twin doors, right? Using technology to create modular congregate spaces that are flexible and that bridge this divide between indoor and outdoor spaces. That's new on the landscape. IoT sensors, you've seen this acronym IoT, it's the Internet of Things. And in short, what it means is sensors and software that are connected to the internet, and they're being used to enhance sanitary and health related monitoring in buildings and spaces. And this includes things like infrared scans and pinpointing crisis locations and sending alerts when those things do happen. So, experts say that when planning for traditional use of buildings, we should recognize that disruption may come about again on the horizon. And so this is a growing trend in terms of planning. For example, if lockdowns return in the future, right? This involves using technology, but also other approaches to build on and test new ways to bridge traditional uses of our buildings, hybrid uses of them, and decentralized work arrangements, and inclusive of how we manage our clients. So in other words, in certain kind of simple and practical way to think about this is, as Omicron continues to wane and as public health restrictions ease, as John noted, and more people return to your facilities, don't throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. Don't abandon altogether those novel ways that you've adapted your building operations with a view to safety and protection, including through the use of technology. In fact, go the opposite direction, because that's what the trend is suggesting. That's what experts are suggesting. And public health officials, of course, are planning for that as well. This includes digitalization of your operations. We're going to talk about that in a section upcoming. So you can see that the key theme here of this section for a takeaway is how we make our physical indoor space and operations adaptable and flexible if and when disruptive events come back to haunt us again. So let's look at the next slide to see what experts say about this challenge of adaptability. So these data here presented are from the space race report that I referred to earlier. They reflect the view of over 500 industry experts who work in the space of building and design and infrastructure design. And in our previous workshop on the safe return to recreation, where we shared information on the hierarchy of controls for keeping clients safe, we talked about people flow and layout, and you can see that on the bottom left with the red arrow near the bottom left. And in the last 2 years, all of you have instituted hugely effective operating procedures and protocols for managing traffic flow, right? Pinch points, congregate spaces within your existing facilities. And this took a lot of ingenuity at the first. We're getting more used to it now, and we're getting really good at it, in fact. In some physical changes were created where you were able to and needed to retrofit your indoor spaces as well. But you can see from this data that the notion of people flow and layout, it turns out, may have been the easier task. As our sector turns its attention to retrofitting and constructing new, healthier buildings for future, what the experts are saying by way of this data is that they overwhelmingly agree that making future infrastructure adaptable is both highly important and highly difficult. And this is shown in the top right of the graph with the green arrow that's pointing up there. So you can see the X and Y axis makes clear that future adaptability is important, highly important, but highly difficult for these folks who actually build and design these buildings. So not far behind, you also see in the bottom right that physical safety rather of occupants, which is a central requirement of our business, is also a challenge going forward for those who build supportive indoor infrastructure and spaces. So the next slide speaks to the question of how we can make informed decisions to help us figure this stuff out as we go forward. So this slide here offers some examples of resources and sources to help inform your thinking around how technology and other aspects of innovation are being used to make our physical spaces and places safer, healthier, more adaptable. I'll just note here, each of these icons are hyperlinked. So on the deck that you received in the chat box, you can click on each of these icons and it will lead you to a source of information. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. These are things that we have found, that I have found, that I think will be helpful to you to inform your thinking. So let's talk about a few of them. The first in the center is the International Wellbeing Institute. This institute offers virtual training, accreditation, certification on how to make buildings that protect and enhance human health and well-being. It's evidence-based. They use standards. They have no fewer than 110 different what they call well features, and that cross 10 different concepts, including employing different technologies to make and keep buildings safe. So go there and see what they have to offer. Closer to home, the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which is an organizational partner of CPRA, by the way, offers a resource entitled Community Buildings Retrofit. You can see that on the far left, and it includes several guidebooks and case studies, including those specific to recreation. So you can go there and see if that might be helpful to you when you're thinking about making retrofits going forward. On the far right, you see Vivo and the red check mark there. Vivo is a Latin word for live. This is a public use community health, wellness, and lifestyle facility and charity that is located in Calgary. Some of you may know it who are visiting us today from the West. It provides both traditional and innovative programs and services to community residents. It's both a civic gathering place. It has a library, for example, but centrally it's a lifestyle center and recreation sport programming center. And with the leadership and support of Dialogue Design, which is an architectural design firm out of Canada here, it's transforming its physical space. And in doing that, it's actually transforming its core offerings as well to be focused on what they term raising healthier generations. So they're using technology to employ facility upgrades, and they're using innovative design to do that as well. For example, they're creating an indoor park. So I referred to twin doors and the notion of bringing the outdoors and the indoors together. They'll have an actual living space, a living park indoors to bridge that, literally that physical gap. They're expanding their aquatics facility. They're creating something that's called the Canadian Healthier Living Academy for Healthier Generations. So it is a learning center. It'll be tied to a living lab. These changes in terms of how we offer and position our value proposition as recreation providers in communities is really a paradigm shift, and they're living this shift and they're leading the way in this shift, I believe anyway. So they're providing and taking leading edge and people-centered design and technology to do this right. And they're creating, I think, a new intersection between what the physical space in a facility can look like and the way that providers like yourself, but others, and including community residents and clients and society as a whole, are doing in terms of how they're rethinking around the priority of health and wellness being central to community life. And this is something that is of great, I think, consequence for our sector as we think about technological improvements and design. So I do want to acknowledge, though, that the Vivo example is obviously a state-of-the-art facility. It's a multi-million-dollar facility, and it's located in a major urban setting. To Caroline's very good presentation and point, this is not applicable necessarily to those who live in rural, remote, and smaller centers, but it's beyond the reach in terms of budget. But I think that what's important here are the innovative concepts that they're employing, more than the size of the infrastructure and its cost, that can be applied to scale in smaller centers as you go forward. So the other resources shown here have these links. You can go there. We don't have time to go through all of them, but I think that some of them may be helpful to you as well. So let's talk now about digital space race on the next slide. In May of 2020, just as it was made clear that the pandemic was not going to be a short-term disruption, those working in digital technology and others made a prediction. And they said that the recovery from COVID-19 was going to be digital. And as the world's peoples were kept apart, like you and I, our families, our colleagues, our community members, the digital ecosystem, they came together, and they did so too at breakneck speed to support governments and industry, civil society, healthcare, obviously, and many other planks in the foundation of daily life worldwide and here in Canada as well. Now, it wasn't perfect. We know this. We've seen how they faltered. But it was certainly helpful for many parts of the economy, though. When we talk about technology and online hybrid working situations, that's just impossible for many sectors of the economy, right? Agriculture, healthcare, construction, cleaning, transport, hospitality, physical retail, and we could go on with that list. And as a consequence of that, we've seen the studies, we've read the news reports, we've seen the news coverage, and it's clear to us in our field that many were left behind, including those that were already vulnerable and underserved. And this speaks to many of the key points that Caroline made in terms of thinking about how technology can be made easily within reach of the average person, including those who are facing barriers. So this phrase of that we're all in this together, it's been made clear that that is not in fact the case. Many people remain in it alone. So what is clear, though, and encouraging is that the growth in digital technology and its increasing application in every aspect of our daily life for everyone, it's been transformational, and it continues to be that way. The growth, as you I think would agree, is exponential rather, and it will remain that way. And for us in recreation and community sport, for you, what this means is getting on that digital train, if you're not already on it, or perhaps risk being left behind. But there's more challenges, and you folks are living these challenges as well. One of them is that on balance, our organizations in our sector are or is not necessarily digital savvy, right? For example, we know we need to collect data to inform our policies and processes, but we're not always sure how to use it to our advantage. And what happens there is the use and application often lags behind the collection, and we don't optimize the use of it. And then it's often used in isolation as well, right? Where its potential to diagnose and problems and inform new policies, that's lost if we're not working with others. But luckily, there are two trends in how to fill this gap from a technological point of view that are taking shape. One is taking an approach that involves establishing clear benchmarks for what data you need to inform your way forward. And so it's about deciding what data is important to collect from the business operations point of view, and what you need to inform changing policy going forward, and then remaining focused on collecting that data, analyzing it to inform improvements going forward. The second is something called digital co-ops. And this speaks to the notion of stovepiping and isolation. Simply put, this is really about breaking down these digital silos, right? Finding partners with similar infrastructure and programming parameters and agreeing to share and compare. So your data pool grows in size and you optimize its use to the advantage of all the players who are involved. So, you know, sport, community sport, recreation facilities and program folks like yourself, work with those down the street, across town, in your region, across the province, and you'll likely get better, bigger, and more informed data. The last barrier, though, is, well, actually two other barriers that are really important for us to keep in mind as we think about employing digitization and technology going forward. Is the notion of staffing and digital literacy. A lot of our folks, whether staff or volunteers, are not tech savvy. Some lack the knowledge and skills to embrace this digital way of working. And it means for our sector that we need to invest in this space. You've heard this before, but it's a critically important point to repeat. It's about the right training and development. It's about skills building. And it's about including working with experts across different sectors who have that know-how to bring to our sector. And finally, digital inequity. You know, the whole notion of build it and they will come from a digital or technological standpoint, it doesn't hold true when consumers and clients that you're serving don't have regular or reliable access to internet. Carolyn referred to that. They don't have English as a first language. They don't even own smartphones in some cases. And in other cases, they haven't grown up online, older Canadians, for example. So we need to apply this lens of equity to our work in technology as we go forward. A couple of other thoughts around examples of trends from the digital world that you've heard of, but I'll maybe unpack a little bit for you. You've heard this term big data. You know, many people ask themselves, what is it? And what does that mean in practical sense? Well, simply put, big data is collecting larger and more complex data sets, especially by using new ways of collecting data. And you may have heard that it's about the 3 V's, the V for Victor, the greater volume of data, greater variety of data, and greater velocity of data. Velocity speaks to the pace at which you collect that data. And taken together, they allow you to build greater data sets to track and monitor things like high-risk incidents in your facilities, as well as perform modeling to figure out what may happen in the future that can guide policymaking and building operations. We've also heard about AI and algorithms, right? We experience them every day on social media. You look for a vacation in the Caribbean online, and in your social media feed, you get ads about vacationing in the Caribbean. AI it's being used to enhance detection and diagnosis of COVID-19 now in the healthcare facilities and other facilities across the world. It contributes to what they refer to as deep learning. You've heard this term before. This is how algorithms accumulate information over time. And what they do is they improve on their performance along the way, right? They get better at it. And in the context of being practical with this, what it helps us to do is it helps us to improve our knowledge over time about how, for example, our users move through our recreation facilities, right? That's going to be important as we move forward. Lastly, wearable trackables. For staff and volunteers, wearable trackables allow daily symptom tracking of your staff and your volunteers where they're on site, things like body temperature, respiratory rate, heart rate, which can help organize, better predict, and understand early warning signs in terms of infections. Now, there's a lot of issues around this, including privacy and other HR issues that are at play here. So we need to pay attention to that. So let's look now at some digital resources and sources on the next slide. We don't have time to delve into all of these either, and I have to move quickly, but of course, because we're running short on time. But let me focus on one. At the bottom left, the one that focuses on addressing one of the challenges posed by new digital technologies, and that's being inclusive to narrow that digital divide, right? That equity lens. At the bottom left, this report that you can go to is from the Diversity Institute at Ryerson University, recently hosted an online forum of digital experts to discuss this challenge of diversity and inclusion with the use of technology. It was an awesome discussion. It was so practical and so helpful. And at the link that you'll find here, you'll also find another link to another helpful report about what skills are needed in a post-COVID-19 digital world. So look at that, but it also introduces you to what's called the Future Skills Center. This is hosted by the Canadian Public Policy Forum. So this is one resource that can be accessed, and the others here are industry-related reports and sources of information that inform you about the digitalization of the economy, of communities and organizations. And so I hope that they're helpful. So let's go on to the next New Earth space race. This is the last piece, and I'm going to move quickly through this. In the fourth workshop that I referred to earlier, we heard from Don Carr from the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And Don spoke at that time to the longstanding link between the community recreation sector, parks, environmental stewardship, and climate action. And the opportunities to build on these links and issues that are noted here on this slide are discussed in Don's presentation, including through the Parks for All initiative, something that I think most, if not all of you, know about. So I urge you to listen to what Don's presentation had to say on the January 27th session. That's available on the bench. But before moving to highlight some of the resources and sources in this section, I want to talk with you about a couple of important points. First of all, the new space race outdoors, i.e. Earth, the environment, relates in your case, in our case as leaders, to our responsibility to the critical importance of environmental impact, while being also stewards of the land that our services and programs are offered on. And as we invite clients back to programming, including outdoor programming, this becomes even more of a priority. So from a perspective of technology, depending on your perspective, the exponential growth in technology related to outdoor use can either help or hinder our efforts. And there are 4 or 5 themes that have emerged as we think about the increase in technology as people use the outdoors. First is access. You think about how technology is helping us to improve our access to far off places, right? Improvements in overland transport, things like off-road vehicles and doing drone reconnaissance. You go down to Canadian Tire, buy a drone, and you can figure out how you want to get somewhere that's in a far off distance place on a backwoods trail. This means more people are accessing new and more places. They're doing it faster, they're doing it more often, and they're doing it with ease. This has implications both positive and negative for our sector. In terms of comfort, high-tech and lightweight and more effective clothing from a technological advancement perspective, and the gear that we use going into these remote places allow more and different users to be comfortable, and they stay longer. That's good, but also it's a challenge. Safety, which is at the center of what we should be thinking about as we think about how many more people are returning to the outdoors and staying in the outdoors as a consequence of the impacts of COVID. Knowledge and training and skill building on how to remain safe in the outdoors, it's as close now to as the click of your phone. So conversely, though, the rush to the outdoors, which has occurred as a consequence of COVID by many who've not spent time there before or who just aren't prepared, mean that perhaps their safety in the end can be at risk. And this is an issue. Communications, right? GPS, personal locator beacons, satellite phones, smartphone apps, endless number of them, improving cell coverage in places where it's never been before. This is allowing outdoor enthusiasts like myself to go further, to remain in touch, to increase their confidence, but at times perhaps increase their overconfidence. And this can find us in places of trouble and concern as well. Lastly, information. Outdoor enthusiasts, whether they're experienced or they're new, they can now access information to tell them exactly where they are, how fast they're moving, at what elevation, in what direction. They can get an update on the weather, and they can look at the terrain ahead of them. All kinds of apps, of course, that we know that we use. And this is all available at the press of the button. Again, positive, but a challenge for us. So these issues provide new opportunities, but also challenges for our sector. And technology is going to continue to help us provide access, safety, communication, but at the same time, lead us down pathways that we never thought we'd be going in terms of how to figure this out in ways that are sustainable. So let's go to the next slide and look at resources and sources. And I'm going to be quick here to say on the bottom right that CPRA's climate action statement can help you position your work in relationship to many of the issues I've talked about and addressed in this section. The climate action network, which is beside that to the left, this is a coalition of about 100 organizations that can help us as leaders to understand and respond to climate action impacts in our work, in recreation and community sport. And finally, the global movement towards sustainable development is one that all recreation professionals at a minimum should be aware of. And better than that, you should be aligning or consider aligning your work with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that come out from the United Nations, I think in 2015. The UN and the OECD provide excellent toolkits on how to partner with other sectors around the SDGs, including with many who are working in environmental action, climate change, and sustainable cities, infrastructure, and life on the land. So of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, more than 5 or 6 of them are related to these issues. So look at them online, and I've created some links here to the SDSN Canada Sustainable Development Solutions Network for you to look at. So I think I've run a bit over. I appreciate the time to present to you today, and thanks very much. And back to you, Krista.
Thank you, Joe. Lots of information packed into there. I really appreciate it. And I think I better give a shout out to our interpreter, Francois, who's probably madly catching up. And I thank him for all of his service to us for the last 5 webinars or workshops. I can't believe I said webinar. I'm going to invite Joe to stay on and invite Caroline and John to come back on. And while they're turning on their cameras, Joe, can we go back to the point about the vacation in the Caribbean? I just want to sort of, after you said that, I couldn't really focus anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn this last piece over to John, and he's going to, with Caroline and Joe, talk a little bit about some of the themes across the presentation related to technology. And then if you have some questions and you want to pop them into the Q&A or the chat box, I'll keep an eye out. And if not, then we'll wrap up when we're done. But I'll pass it over to you, John. Thanks.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, just, and I know we're over time, so I'll be brief. We did talk about the easing of restrictions and how we as people that are leaders in the sector need to remain adaptable in order to be able to respond to those new challenges as they move forward. You heard about the need to deal with both your clients or customers, participants, as well as your staff and volunteers, and how that is a very important cog in the wheel of making sure that everybody is supported throughout our recovery. You heard about technology, how it can be overwhelming, but how it can be scaled so that you're able to use it in a way that fits with your own personal circumstances, you and your organization. We learned approaches and lessons and models and the use of technology and its applicability to the sector, and more importantly, to various organizations within the sector, and how there continues to be a need to be creative about how you address the use of all these new elements. Safety of clients, you heard both Caroline and Joe talk about the need for safety, and especially as you're dealing with technology, everything from confidentiality to how data is stored, all of those things are extremely important to keep top of mind. It was important before, and it's even more important now. Partnerships and alliances and collaborations. This should be a relatively easy one for our sector because we have done that, but it is reinforced now that collaborations are not just from within the sector, but also cross-sectoral collaboration is required. And we have seen elements of that already where we are dealing with issues that we have never had to deal with before. And that is just an example of cross-sectoral collaboration. And lastly, remember about equity, privacy, and the ethical practices theme that Joe mentioned. I think it's very important that we keep that top of mind as well as we move forward. So, Krista, I will stop there because I know we are running.
Actually, you're pretty good. I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now or the chat, but I would just ask, I guess, each of you well, maybe it's a two-part question, but I'll just start with if people had to make a decision about what they could tackle right now around the technology, what would it be? Because this can be, as you've mentioned, daunting and big and expensive, but on the other hand, it can also be more simple. So what would be your recommendation, your advice? If there's something that you have to tackle right now, what would it be?
From my perspective, from a program delivery point of view, I think that the trend that is now here is a hybrid blend of in-person and remote or virtual programming. And I think that I don't think this is something that is now going to be a question if or is it going to be or is it not? It is definitely going to be. People are going to be looking for a combination, a hybrid combination, so that they can pick and choose the manner in which they decide to access our programs and services. So I strongly advise people to start creating strategies that mix those different delivery mechanisms.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Joe, did you want to, you had your microphone on?
Yeah, I think I kept it on. I'll just add to say that from my personal perspective and by way of consultations and dialogue and research that I've done across the country, the strength of the opportunity to position community-based recreation and community sport in contributing to building back better in a broad community context. So beyond our sector, it is about positioning our work, including in this case through technology, to ensure that we address inclusivity, equity, diversity, and in doing that, I spoke to that, of course, as did others in their presentation. And while it may not be top of your list of figuring out how to ensure that technology speaks to and serves and addresses this issue, it should be near the top, I believe, of your efforts when you look at making sure that technology is accessible and relatable and accessible to those who traditionally have been not able to access our services and programs, but even more now face perhaps even greater barriers to do so as we move out of this 2 years of pandemic life.
Thanks, Joe. I know from CPRA's point of view, we also want to be looking, even as we share our workshops and webinars and other professional development opportunities, how we can make them more accessible as well. So we'll be looking into that as well. Caroline, last word to you if you wanted to share anything else.
I think, as John mentioned, it just comes back to integrating what were good practices before COVID, but what are good practices or wise practices moving forward with technology. And I'm a people person, and I really truly believe that we need to build capacity for our sector. And the way that we're going to do that is by helping people make connections. So we need to use technology to make people feel reconnected as we move forward. And that will strengthen what we can do in recreation. So I think that we've got some amazing opportunities ahead. We need to be innovative and creative, but we just need to come out strong again. So we already are. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'll just take an opportunity now to thank all of three of our speakers, John, Joe, and Caroline. Really appreciate the time you took to put all your presentations together and then join us today. And then to Francois again for his interpretation, Mike for your words at the beginning, and MJ for all your help with putting these together. As I mentioned, this is the last of our 5 Reimagine Rec webinars or workshops. So go to the bench. All of the information will be on there. The other thing that we do is after each of these, we put together a little knowledge translation tool. So it has the key learnings and highlights from each of the workshops. So you'll have that information. You have access to the slides, and then you have access to the recording. So we hope that you'll take advantage of that and use them, share them with your colleagues. We have one more workshop coming up, not on the Reimagine Rec side, but on our gender equity project. That's March 9th from 12 to 3. And we're looking at how to do community engagement to increase facility use and design for women and girls. And then we have one last lunch and learn on March 15th at noon Eastern, and that will be focusing on, we'll have Life Saving Society and Red Cross to talk about their new program, and that switch between Red Cross's programs all going over to Life Saving Society. So hope you can join us. I think the promotion is going out for that tomorrow. So want to thank all of you again for your time today. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you at our upcoming events. If you have any questions, thoughts about workshop topics, please get in touch with us at info@cpra.ca and look out for the email that MJ will send you for the evaluation. And with that, have a great day. Thank you.